$75 million. That's the total cost of Chandrayaan-3, the lander, the rover, the propulsion module, and the launch vehicle that put them on the moon's south pole on August 23, 2023. $75 million. The film Interstellar cost $165 million to make. Russia's Luna 25, which attempted to land on the same region 2 days earlier and crashed, cost roughly $200 million. NASA's Maven Mars orbiter, not a lander, just an orbiter, cost $582 million. The question is not whether India's space program is impressive. The question is what ISRO knows about building spacecraft that other agencies have forgotten or never learned, or were never allowed to practice. The previous video was about a rocket that costs $4 billion per launch, and the contract architecture that makes that price inevitable. This video is the mirror image. Same physics, same destination class, different system, different outcome. On August 23, 2023, the Vikram lander touched down near the lunar South Pole at 6:04 p.m. Indian Standard Time. India became the fourth country to successfully soft land on the moon, after the Soviet Union, the United States, and China. More precisely, India became the first country to land near the South Pole, a region of intense scientific interest because of water ice deposits in permanently shadowed craters. The Pragyan rover rolled out and operated for 1 lunar day, 14 Earth days. It measured soil temperature, detected sulfur and other elements, and confirmed the presence of a thin plasma layer near the surface. Then, lunar night came. Temperatures dropped to -200 degrees Celsius, and both the lander and rover went silent. They were designed for exactly this. 1 lunar day, no more. The mission did what it was built to do, within the parameters it was given, on a budget that wouldn't cover the catering line on a major film set. So how did ISRO do it? The short answer is constraint. The longer answer is a philosophy that runs through every Indian space mission since the 1960s. ISRO's annual budget is roughly $1.5 billion. NASA's is over $25 billion. That ratio, roughly 1 to 17, is not a disadvantage ISRO overcame. It's a condition that shaped every engineering decision the organization makes. When your budget is a 17th of your competitors, you don't build the way they build. You can't afford to. And in that inability, something structurally different emerges. The origin of that structure goes back to the 1960s. Vikram Sarabhai, the physicist who founded ISRO, convinced the Indian government that a space program could serve a developing nation's needs. Communications for remote villages, weather prediction for farmers, resource mapping for a country that couldn't afford to survey its own territory by conventional means. The program was designed from the start to produce applications, not prestige. There are photographs from the early years showing scientists transporting rocket parts on bicycles. That is not folklore. It is the operational culture that produced Chandrayaan-3. First, ISRO builds almost everything in-house. Where NASA contracts satellite manufacturing to private companies, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and manages those contracts through layers of oversight. ISRO designs, fabricates, integrates, and tests spacecraft at its own centers. The U.R. Rao Satellite Center in Bengaluru handles spacecraft. The Vikram Sarabhai Space Center handles launch vehicles. The chain is shorter, the overhead is lower. There are fewer interfaces where cost accumulates. Second, ISRO reuses hardware and designs aggressively. The Chandrayaan-3 propulsion module was based on Chandrayaan-2's design. The launch vehicle, LVM-3, is a workhorse that has flown multiple times. Mangalyaan, the Mars orbiter, repurposed hardware originally built for Chandrayaan-2. In Western aerospace, heritage hardware sometimes means legacy costs. The SLS uses shuttle-era components, but the contract structure around them inflates rather than reduces the price. In ISRO's model, heritage means savings. Same hardware, lower price, because the institution that builds it also flies it. Third, ISRO skips steps that other agencies consider mandatory. It doesn't build full engineering models for pre-launch testing. It flies with a single version and accepts the risk. It doesn't take out mission insurance. It doesn't run the kind of parallel redundancy programs that NASA uses to mitigate contractor risk. These choices carry real consequences. If a mission fails, the hardware is gone and there's no insurance payout. But the approach also eliminates entire cost layers that, in NASA's model, often exceed the cost of the spacecraft itself. And fourth, this is the part that gets under-discussed. ISRO's workforce operates on fundamentally different economics. Indian engineers earn a fraction of what their American counterparts make, which compresses labor costs across the board. This is a real factor, and it matters. But labor costs alone don't explain the gap. Russia's Luna 25 was built in a country with lower labor costs than the United States, and still cost nearly 3 times what Chandrayaan-3 cost. The cost difference between ISRO and other agencies is not primarily about salaries. It's about how many people work on a mission, how many layers of management exist between an engineer and a decision, and how many parallel processes run simultaneously to satisfy oversight requirements that exist for contractual, not technical, reasons. There's a case study that makes this sharper. In 2013, ISRO launched Mangalyaan, the Mars orbiter mission. Budget: $74 million. Development time: 15 months from project approval to launch. It was India's first interplanetary mission, and it succeeded on the first attempt. India became the 4th entity to reach Mars orbit, after the Soviet Union, NASA, and the European Space Agency. No other national agency had done it on a maiden try. The mission was an exercise in elegant constraint. ISRO's launch vehicle, the PSLV, didn't have enough thrust to send the spacecraft directly to Mars, so the team used a series of Earth-bound orbit-raising maneuvers, slingshots around the planet to build velocity before breaking free toward Mars. It took longer. It was less direct. It worked. The trajectory was a product of the same philosophy that defines everything ISRO does. If you can't afford the brute force solution, find the clever one. NASA's comparable mission, MAVEN, launched around the same time and entered Mars orbit within days of Mangalyaan. MAVEN's cost? $582 million, nearly 8 times more. MAVEN carried more sophisticated instruments and produced more peer-reviewed science, over 500 papers compared to Mangalyaan's 27. That gap matters and deserves honesty. Mangalyaan was primarily a technology demonstrator, not a science mission. Its methane sensor had a design flaw and couldn't detect methane at all. ISRO repurposed it as an albedo mapper. The scientific output was modest. But here's the diagnostic question, and it's the one this video is really about. If you gave ISRO 8 times the budget, would they have produced 8 times the science? Or would the institutional architecture that makes ISRO cheap also make it capable of scaling? The honest answer is, we don't know. And that uncertainty is the most interesting part of the comparison. There is a fair objection to the framing of this video, and it needs stating. NASA's missions are more complex. They carry heavier payloads. They are designed to higher safety standards. They serve broader scientific objectives. Comparing Chandrayaan-3 to the Artemis program is like comparing a field hospital to a research university. Both treat patients, but the scope, the rigor, and the infrastructure are fundamentally different. The 75 million number is real, but it describes a different category of mission than the $4 billion Artemis launch. That said, the gap between 75 million and 4 billion is not explained by mission complexity alone. There is a structural multiplier embedded in NASA's procurement model. Layers of contracting, oversight, review, insurance, redundancy, and political allocation that inflates costs independent of technical requirements. When NASA's Inspector General says the Artemis program is unaffordable, the problem is not that going to the moon is inherently expensive. The problem is that the system through which NASA goes to the moon is inherently expensive. ISRO's existence proves the point by providing a control case. There's something ISRO learned that wasn't planned. In 1974, after India's first nuclear test, international sanctions cut off access to foreign space technology. ISRO couldn't buy components. It couldn't license designs. It was forced to develop everything indigenously: propulsion, navigation, communications, materials. At the time, this was a crippling setback. In retrospect, it was the foundation of everything that followed. Try explaining that to a procurement officer. that being cut off from the global supply chain was the best thing that ever happened to the program. HALE has tried. The response is usually a long silence followed by a change of subject. Indigenous development did two things. It kept costs low, no import markups, no licensing fees, no dependency on foreign contractors whose pricing reflects their own overhead structures. And it built institutional knowledge that couldn't be outsourced. When ISRO designs a spacecraft, the engineers who design it also build it, test it, and fly it. The feedback loop is measured in hallways, not contracts. Chandrayaan-2, in 2019, was supposed to be the mission that proved ISRO could soft land on the moon. It didn't. A software glitch disrupted communication during descent, and the Vikram lander crashed. It was a public failure. ISRO's response was telling. The organization announced Chandrayaan-3 within months, requested initial funding of 75 million rupees, about $1 million, to begin work, and had the mission ready to fly within 4 years. The redesigned lander incorporated changes specifically addressing the failure modes from Chandrayaan-2. The approach was iterative, fast, and cheap. Fail, diagnose, fix, fly again. A cycle that cost $75 million per attempt, not $4 billion. This is where the two models diverge most clearly. NASA's approach to failure is institutional. Reviews, commissions, redesigns, and schedule delays that add years and billions. The shuttle program spent a decade between Challenger in 1986 and its return to flight. After Artemis 1's heat shield anomaly, NASA's path to Artemis 2 accumulated delays and technical reviews that pushed the mission from 2024 to 2026. Each review adds cost. Each delay compounds it. ISRO's approach to failure is operational. Identify the fault, fix the hardware, launch again. Both models have virtues, but only one model costs $75 million. The question underneath all of this isn't about India. It's about architecture. When you design an institution to manage risk through oversight, review, and contract structure, the risks get managed, but the costs grow without bound. When you design an institution to manage risk through simplicity, iteration, and short feedback loops, the costs stay low, but the scope stays narrow. Neither model is right, neither is wrong. They answer different questions with different trade-offs. The deeper question, and it's the one nobody in Washington or Bengaluru has answered, is whether there's a third model. One that combines ISRO's cost discipline with NASA's scientific ambition. One that builds complex, high-capability missions without the procurement overhead that makes every bolt a budget line item. SpaceX suggests it's possible. ISRO suggests it's possible. The institutional resistance to finding out is the most expensive silence in aerospace. There's an object flying through interstellar space right now that was built by people who thought the way ISRO thinks, except they did it in 1977. With less computing power than a modern calculator, and they designed it to last 5 years. It's been 47. The engineering philosophy behind that object, build it right, build it once, and trust it, is the same philosophy that put a lander on the moon's south pole for $75 million. The next video is about that object, what it's still doing out there, and what its survival says about the difference between building for a quarter and building for a century.